and take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to part one of a two-part Barriers Fund program training webinar series. My name is Anya Taylor. I know that I've met most of you on the call today, but for those who I have not yet met, I serve as the Barriers Fund coordinator for Texas Homeless Network. And before we dive into today's agenda, I just wanted to provide some quick housekeeping items, as some of you may not be as familiar with Adobe Connect, which is the platform that we are using to provide you with this training today. So you can see there first of all, there's a chat box at the very top right hand of your screen. Your microphones will not be active during today's training presentation. However, we will have a live Q&A portion of today's training reserved for the very end, where your mics will be active. So you can either ask a question during that time. You can also type your question into the chat box there. Just keep that in mind. So if any questions come up for you during this presentation, you can either wait till our live Q&A at the very end or go ahead and just drop them in the chat box. Beneath the chat box on the right-hand side is where all of the materials that we will be going over in this training are housed. So you can go ahead and download those materials and follow along with us as we work through each of those documents. And at any point in time, if you have any questions or anything like that, go ahead and drop it in the chat and we'll answer those as they come up. So again, my name is Anya Taylor. I serve as the Barriers Fund coordinator for Texas Homeless Network. As part of my role as the Barriers Fund coordinator, I am tasked with providing support and technical assistance on an as-needed basis to all 11 of our CSBG Cares subrecipients. I also lead the effort for our Texas Homeless Network in processing and reviewing all of the reimbursement requests received on a monthly basis from all of our CSBG Cares subrecipients. And so I will be the main presenter for today's presentation as we walk through all of the Barriers Fund program documents. Now, as I mentioned in the very beginning, this is part one of a two-part Barriers Fund program training series. In this first session, we will be going over an in-depth review of all of the program documents required to be collected and completed to determine client eligibility and to ensure that the cost incurred is eligible for reimbursement through Texas Homeless Network. Really, this training is targeted to staff, agency staff who provide direct client assistance and work to collect and obtain all support documentation from clients that are required for the purpose of grant reporting. I want to go ahead and just start reviewing all of the program materials that are required to be collected and completed by each of our subrecipient agencies. So we can go ahead and move on to the first program document that I want to share with you today, which is our client file checklist. Let me see if I can. There we go.
I got you.
Thank you. So this
is
our
camera there.
Yes, I will turn my camera back on at the very end when we do our live Q&A. So this is the first program document that I wanted to share with you all today. This is our client file checklist. And just kind of as a brief overview or history, the Barriers Fund program is a completely brand new program and concept for Texas Homeless Network. And so as we were working internally to develop this program, we wanted to make sure that Texas Homeless Network is doing a great job as serving as the lead agency. And we wanted to streamline all processes and make it easy for our subrecipients to quickly and efficiently determine client eligibility. And so as part of that, we worked to create all program documents that help agencies determine whether or not a client would be eligible for assistance under the Barriers Fund program. And so collecting and completing all of these documents that you see on the client file checklist are a critical part in ensuring that not only the client is eligible to receive assistance under the Barriers Fund program, but that Texas Homeless Network can easily review and process all of the reimbursement requests without any issues. So the first document that you see on this client file checklist is the client application for assistance. And as it notes on the bottom of this form, the client application for assistance is the only program document that THN did not create on behalf of our CSBG Care subrecipients. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We understand and recognize that all of our CSBG Care subrecipients are unique in their own internal processes and have implemented and administered the Barriers Fund program in different ways that is unique to that agency. We didn't create the client application on behalf of each agency because they're all different, and we wanted to provide the opportunity for agencies to have flexibility with producing and creating this document. The client application for assistance is a critical program document, and while it was not provided, it's not a document that was provided by THN, I want to just reiterate that this is a requirement. So if your agency has not yet created a client application for the purpose of your local Barriers Fund program, it's important and critical that you go ahead and do that and submit that as part of the client file in each respective client file in HMIS. Now, Texas Homeless Network has not set any stringent requirements on what kind of information should be collected on the client application. There's a lot of flexibility here with this document. I would encourage that each agency work to create an application for the Barriers Fund that works for you. So this could include collecting basic client data information that you would usually collect in HMIS so that it's in one centralized location. I've also recommended to a couple of our subrecipients that they could include some questions on the client application that would help in tracking the performance outcomes that are written into the service contract between THN and that respective CSBG Care subrecipient. For example, some of our subrecipient agencies have a performance outcome related to this contract that a certain percentage of clients served through the Barriers Fund program have to come through a referral process. So the client application in that case would serve as a good resource to document and track how the client was referred to the Barriers Fund program. So essentially what I wanted to just reiterate here is to modify the client application in a way that works for your agency, using it as a document to help agency staff screen clients, not only to determine client eligibility for the Barriers Fund program, but to also identify clients who would be good candidates for the Barriers Fund. So that's really what I have as an update to share on the client application. Again, this is a required document included that should be included in every client file in HMIS. The second kind of checkbox here that you can see on the client file checklist is identification documents. And this looks different based on the client and based on the identification or proof of identification documents that they can provide. We have a couple examples here. You can see driver's license or identification card. However, there are other other support documents that would provide proof of identification, such as a birth certificate, social security card. Again, all of this information should be uploaded to that respective client file in HMIS. So the next thing on this client file checklist, as you can see, is the income eligibility documentation. Now, this is where we start getting into the program documents that help subrecipient agencies determine whether or not a client would be eligible to receive assistance through the Barriers Fund program. Just as a quick reminder, when determining a client's income eligibility, a client or household must not exceed 200% of the federal poverty limits. That's a contractual requirement for the Barriers Fund program. And that's how you can determine whether or not a client meets those income requirements. Now, there's going to be two different scenarios that you may encounter. Either a client or a household will have at least one or more of the 9 eligible sources of income that would need to be accounted for when determining whether or not a client or a household meets these requirements. Or you may encounter a client or household that does not currently have any source of eligible income. So in a case where a client that you're assisting or household does not have income, you would work with the client to complete the Zero Income Certification Form. You'll notice that we have this form available for you as the third document in the files box. And I'll have Craig, if you can, just pull it up here so we can take a look at that form. While Craig is pulling that up, I just want to share again that if a client does not have income, you or the agency staff working with this client would complete the Zero Income Certification Form. You would not need to complete or upload the Income Calculator Workbook, which we will go over here in a minute. So this is the Barriers Fund Program Zero Income Certification Form. You can see it requires the client's HMIS ID up at the very top and the date that the form is completed. Then there's a box or a line where the client would write in their name. And then down at the very bottom of this form, this is a section where the client would complete. So you can see there it says, I have stated during this verification process that I have no income at this time. I have not received income since, and then they can put in a respective date there. I do not expect to receive any income until, and then they can complete that field. And then they can share whether or not they've applied for some other form of financial assistance, and then when they applied for that financial assistance. At the very end of the form, it requires a client signature, a staff signature, and the date the form was completed and signed by both the client and caseworker or agency staff member working to support the client. Now, one thing important to note here, and you'll notice this as we go through the additional program documents, what I'm going to be looking for on the back end when the payment request is submitted, I go through each of those program documents that would need to be included in the client file, and I check that the form is completed correctly and it's completed in its entirety. So if the form is missing client signatures or staff signatures or dates, that would be an incomplete form. And therefore I would send it back to the agency so that they can complete it. I say that because it's very important that each of our subrecipient agencies work to complete the form in its entirety when the client, at the time that the client receives assistance, because it's very difficult, I know in most cases, to reach back out to that client and try to get them to come in to either sign a form that was not signed or recomplete a form that was not completed correctly the first time. So that's why I'm sharing this information and just wanting to, I guess, provide that reminder during this training seminar. So again, this form here is for clients who do not have any of the 9 eligible sources of income that we will take a look at on the income calculator workbook. So I am going to now share my screen so that you can see what the income calculator workbook looks like. And we will go over how to complete this workbook on behalf of a client who does in fact have one of these 9 eligible income sources. It may be a little bit small on your screen as we're going through it. So again, you have access to this document in the files box on the right-hand side of Adobe Connect. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so that way you can see the first tab on the income calculator workbook. This is the instructions tab. So this box essentially just serves as a resource for agency staff who utilize the income calculator workbook to determine client eligibility. So when pulling up the workbook and using it, you can just reference the instructions tab. If you have additional questions on how to utilize this workbook to calculate income, you can always reach out to me for additional assistance. The second tab in the income calculator workbook is the income calculator itself. This is the document or the tab that is required to be completed and included in the client file in HMIS. So you would first complete this first box on behalf of the client, writing in the client name, selecting the household size, providing a physical address if the client does in fact have one, writing in the date that the income calculator workbook was prepared, and the staff member name who prepared this workbook on behalf of the client. Down in this second tab here, we have the income calculator itself. So you can see there's up to 4 columns of up to 4 household members who are receiving income. If in fact the household has more than 4 household members receiving income, you would just need to add additional columns and calculate them accordingly. So the head of household is the first column here, and you can see the 9 different eligible income sources that would need to be accounted for when determining client income eligibility. You would type in the amount that the client receives for each household member. The calculator does the work for you in that it will total these amounts and provide a total monthly income as well as a total annual income for this client or household. Now, once the calculations have been completed and staff have obtained the appropriate support documentation for the household or client income, you would ensure that this total annual income in this yellow field right here does not exceed the 200% column on the FPL table tab at the very end of this calculator workbook. So you can see here highlighted in yellow is where a client could not exceed this amount per the family size. So we have that here. So you would just need to check that and make sure the client does not exceed that amount for their household size. If you're able to determine that the client or household is in fact eligible to receive assistance based on their income, you would just check here that yes, this client or household is eligible for assistance through the Barriers Fund program. The client would need to sign, and there's also a line for a staff signature as well. What I'm looking for here is completion of this form. Again, client signature, staff signature, that all of these boxes, all of these fields have something in it. The household size is either circled or notated here. Client's name is on here and it matches what is in the client file in HMIS, etc. Now, what we didn't go over, and I just wanted to share with you briefly, included in this income calculator workbook is two different tabs on the income, first, that should be accounted for. So you can see here that this box right here, or this table, matches what is on the income calculator workbook itself. For example, this first line, wages and salaries, if you're not quite sure what is included in this first eligible source of income, you can always reference the table on this included income tab and see that wages and salaries include the full amount before any payroll deductions of wages and salaries, overtime, commissions, fees, tips, and bonuses and other compensation for personal services. So this provides a more detailed description of the line items on the income calculator workbook. And then of course we have here all of the income that should not be accounted for and should be excluded when calculating a client or household's income eligibility. So again, this income calculator tab is what I'm going to be looking for in the client file. To make sure that the income calculation is complete, we would need to have some kind of backup support documentation for all eligible sources of income that are notated on the income calculator workbook. For example, paycheck stubs, letters from the Social Security stating how much the client receives on a monthly or annual basis, etc. So that support documentation is critical and it needs to match what is listed on the income calculator workbook. I want to move on now to determining a client's homeless status verification. This is another requirement, contractual requirement for the Barriers Fund program. There's similar to the income, there are two different scenarios that you would encounter here working with a client. Either the client is currently experiencing literal homelessness, or the client meets the criteria of at risk of homelessness. So again, in determining homeless status verification, you would pick one of the two forms based on that client's situation. So either they are currently homeless or they are at risk of becoming homeless. I see oftentimes agencies submit both of these forms or complete both of these forms with the client when only one is needed. So we're looking for either or here. So in looking at the At-Risk of Homelessness Self-Certification Form, this would need to be completed for clients who meet the at-risk criteria. So again, this form starts off with the client name and date. And then we have 3 different criteria that a client must meet in order to fall under the at-risk of homelessness category. This is especially important, and I want to highlight that a client must initial next to all 3 of these criteria here in order to fall or meet the at-risk status. Sometimes I see either 1 or 2 of these 3 bullet points initialed by the client when we're looking for all 3 here. So that's just something important to note. If the client does not meet all 3 of these criteria, they would not fall under the at-risk of homelessness status, and therefore would be ineligible to receive assistance under the Barriers Fund program. So once you have determined and the client initials next to all 3 criteria here, it asks this next question in the middle of the form asks agency staff, did the client initial next to all 3 criteria above? So you can check yes or no. If it is yes, the client would meet this criteria. If no, the client would be ineligible for assistance under the Barriers Fund program. Again, this form concludes with a client signature, staff signature, and dates. When I'm doing my review of all of the client files, I'm going to be looking that this form is initialed next to all 3 bullet points. The client name is included on here. We have client and staff signatures, essentially that this form is completed in its entirety. Now, in addition to the at-risk of homelessness self-certification form, we have a self-certification of homelessness form that is also a part of the required program documents. Again, this is for clients who are currently experiencing literal homelessness. So I know Craig is working to pull that form up so that we can take a look at it together. It's also in the files box on the right-hand side of your screen.
Sorry, I believed
the self-certification of homelessness.
Which one do you need? Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I believe it's number 6.
Got it.
Self-certification of homelessness form.
Wait. That's the 6 is Spanish version, so I need number 5, right?
Is 6 Spanish?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Do you have it on your end?
Then I may not have it in there.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Let me check and see if I can pull it up. We also have, just in case you don't know, we also have these forms in Spanish versions for clients who are primarily Spanish speaking. So that if that is required for your agency or needed, just let me know. We can produce these forms or share them with you in Spanish as well. So I'm going to pull up here the self-certification of homelessness form. Okay, and let me just share my screen really quick. All right. So this is the self-certification of homelessness forms for clients who currently are experiencing literal homelessness. Again, a client would write in their name and the date that the form is completed. And unlike the at-risk of homelessness self-certification form, a client does not need or is not required to initial next to all 3 of these bullet points. They would just initial next to the ones that are applicable to them. So you can read them here. The client would initial next to the ones that which categories they fall under. The Self-Certification of Homelessness form has a section on the form where the client would provide like a self-certification statement on where they are currently staying and the period of time that they have been experiencing homelessness. So this is a section that the client would complete on their own and just self-certify. Again, this form ends with the client signature, staff signature, and dates. So the Self-Certification of Homelessness form is pretty much pretty straightforward. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to take a look at the 7th program document, which is the COVID-19 Relief and Assistance Form. The Barriers Fund program is funded by Community Services Block Grant CARES Act funding. And what that essentially means is because this funding comes directly through the CARES Act, the funds have to be used only to prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID-19. So that is what this form helps to ensure. So you can see here that in probably like the middle of the form, it asks, has agency staff ensured that the assistance provided shall be used only to prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID? And it's either yes or no. If it's yes, then you would keep going. If no, then this expense, this assistance, whatever it may be, would not be eligible. Again, you would include the client name here, or they would write in their name, and they would identify or select which areas they have been affected by COVID-19. So which of the following ways they've been affected by COVID-19, so you can see them there. There's also an other checkbox where they can write in another area that is not listed above. And again, it ends with a client signature, staff signature, and dates. The next form is the proof of last resort form. And the Barriers Fund program, you might notice in all of our program materials and in the service contracts, we refer to it often as a fund of last resort. And that means that the fund can only be used when there are no other community resources available to meet that specific need. That is a contractual requirement that we being Texas Homeless Network and our subrecipients have to meet in order to remain compliant with the requirements set by the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, or TDHCA. So this is a really important piece in order to ensure that the fund is being administered accordingly. So the proof of last resort form ensures that the agency staff have ensured there are no other resources or funds in the community to fulfill this request. What I see oftentimes in review of client files is that this first checkbox here is marked yes, but then this checkbox, this second question here, there's nothing notated here. Both of these are important. So you can see here this first question says, have agency staff ensured there are no other resources or funds to fulfill this request? It's either yes or no. So if the agency staff select yes, then they would respond to this question. It states, if other resources exist, have agency staff determined that those resources are unable to meet the needs identified, and or has the client affirmed that they will not accept other resources to meet this need? Again, it's a yes or no. So in bolded letters here, it says if agency staff are able to answer yes to the above questions, if agency staff are unable to answer yes to either of these questions, so that's why they're really important to mark them both, CSBG funds may not be expended and the client should be directed to more appropriate resources. So both of these checkboxes have to be marked yes in order for the expense to be eligible. Again, this form concludes with the client signature, staff signature, and dates. Now, you can see here on the bottom of the form in this second foot, or this first footnote here, In addition to the proof of last resort form, Texas Homeless Network requires additional support documentation that backs up this form. So that could include some kind of proof of communication with potential suppliers, so emails, like a community resource checklist, or a similar document that essentially demonstrates that the agency did their due diligence around ensuring that there was no other community resources in existence or could meet that need before issuing the client assistance. So again, proof of last resort form is the only program document that requires additional support documentation. And it is a requirement, that support documentation is a requirement as backup in order for Texas Homeless Network to process the reimbursement request for that client. Also in the files, as you can see, is the Barriers Fund Program Policy and Procedure Manual. And I wanted to allow enough time today for us to have a live Q&A with participants who were able to join today's session. So we won't be going over the Policy and Procedure Manual, but I did want you all to have access to this. This is also on the Barriers Fund webpage on the THN website. I encourage everyone who is involved in the implementation and administration of the local Barriers Fund program to review this document. Texas Homeless Network made some recent changes, as you can see on the version history recently to this document. So I would encourage you to read this, understand the subrecipient expectations and what subrecipient requirements are during the post-award process. Before we go into the Q&A portion of today's training, and I know this has been a lot of information offered pretty quickly, so I recognize and understand that, and I welcome any questions you may have. I just want to share a reminder that on the client file checklist that we looked at the very beginning of this training, the client files are listed in a particular order, beginning with the client application for assistance and ending with the support documentation to back up the expenditure for that particular client. What we're looking for to be uploaded in the client file in HMIS is one PDF packet for each client. For example, this PDF packet would start with the client application for assistance, and it would include all of the forms that you see on this client file checklist in the order that they are listed, concluding with the backup for the expenditure to show or verify proof of assistance. This will help tremendously to expedite the review and approval process. We have a quick turnaround internal deadline to get this report, our reimbursement report, submitted to TDHCA every single month. So this is what we're going to be requiring moving forward, is one PDF packet uploaded to every single client file, beginning with the client application for assistance and ending with the support documentation to show proof of assistance. I'm going to pause there and open it up for any questions that you all may have after that overview of the program documents. I'm going to check the chat really quick because I know we got a couple of questions come in when I was presenting.
We got one from Daisy. If client just started a job and has not received first paycheck at time of application, would that qualify for zero income?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question, Daisy. Again, some of these scenarios are just on a case-by-case basis. So in that instance, when a client has just recently started a job and does not have a current history of payment and may not have received their first paycheck yet at the time of application, they would qualify or fall under that zero income. So we have to show or demonstrate a history of payment, and it provides in that income calculator workbook provides more details on how to calculate that client's income. For example, I think it's like the last 60 days based on their last 60 days of being paid. So in that instance, they would complete the zero income certification form.
Okay, the next was what type of documents, if any, are required to be supplied to justify certification of at-risk or homeless?
So the self-certification of at-risk form that we reviewed during this session, it is number 5 listed on the files box. That is what is required to verify that the client meets the at-risk criteria. Similarly, to verify show some proof of proof documentation that the client falls under the currently experiencing homelessness category, that would be the self-certification of homelessness form. So as long as those forms are completed by the client and caseworker and are complete, then that would help determine whether or not a client meets the homeless status verification to receive assistance under the Barriers Fund program. And I see Craig has dropped into the chat that mics are on. If you would like to speak during this live Q&A portion of the training, or you can just drop in your question to the chat. That is correct, Soraya. So no support documentation required for either the at-risk of homelessness form or self-certification of homelessness form. Just those forms are required. Again, the only program document that requires additional support documentation is the proof of last resort form. And as a reminder for everyone, this training is and has been, will be recorded, and we will be sharing out the link to this recording in the upcoming days once we complete part 2 of this Barriers Fund program training webinar series. So that way you can reference it at a later date and time as needed. And if additional agency staff were not able to be in attendance during this live training, you can please feel free to share the link with other staff that you work with who provide that direct client assistance and may benefit from this training. Just as a reminder, the forms for the Barriers Fund program, everything we went over today, if you need access to those forms, please feel free to reach out to me. You can also, like I said, download them from the files box in Adobe Connect. The meeting agenda for today, I would also recommend saving, as it has different links to the policies and procedure manual, as well as contact information for the HMIS help desk, and my email address in case you need to reach out or contact me. The program documents that we review today are pretty straightforward. We just really wanted to provide an overview of the forms again. You can see that all of the forms really have additional notes on them, like on how to complete them, what we're going to be looking for, really just trying to simplify how to determine client eligibility for the program. What I'm mainly wanting to express here is we're going to be looking for completion of the forms. So completing the forms in their entirety and that the forms are completed correctly before proceeding with processing the reimbursement reports. Are there any more questions? I know most of you are joining us for part 2 of the training series where we're going to go over the reporting aspect of the Barriers Fund program and submission procedures of the monthly reimbursement report. But I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have. Well, if you're joining us for part 2 of the training series, Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're staying in this room here. So
That is correct. Yeah, I'm just prepping for part 2 right now. So I was letting your cues come in. I'm pulling everything up for round 2.
Yeah, thank you.
2021 R1.
John, I'll send that out to you via email. I can do that right now.
Where is this form going? Oh, that's why. Alrighty. Yeah, John, just stay in the room with us. We're gonna use the same room for part 2. We got a few minutes if you want to go get some coffee or water break, whatever you need. We'll start right at the top of the hour of 3. And then part 2. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and bring in part 2's files, but I'm gonna leave part 1's files here, so if y'all need them for later. All right, we got a 10-minute reprieve.